Hey everybody, we're beginning a new teaching series this week in the book of Revelation. You know, a lot of the Christian life is about learning where to fix our eyes and to fix our minds, especially in times that are difficult, where we can easily get dragged down into focusing and dwelling on the bad news, on the negative aspects of this current moment. You know, one of my favorite scriptures is that where there is no vision, the people perish. This is from one of the Proverbs. And this is often taken to mean where there's no strategic, humanly given vision for an organization, it sort of dwindles. But biblically speaking, what the proverb is getting at is saying that where there's no divine revelation from God, people perish, people languish, people get discouraged and drift off course. And this is one of those moments where I think we could really use a fresh dose of divine revelation. I mean, a reminder of what God says is true. Something that we can really grab onto and that can anchor us to navigate the uncertain moment we're living through. Where there's no divine revelation, people perish. Well, we don't want you to perish. We want you to thrive in the midst of difficulty. And so we're beginning this study in a book called Revelation. Unfortunately, this book has become known for end-time speculation on the last days on earth, rather than on the glorious, life-giving, hope-filled vision for how we as Christians can live right now, today, in whatever age of history we live. In the introduction to this book, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads these words aloud, and blessed are all those who hear these words and take them to heart." Well, I know that many of us would describe our attempts at reading Revelation leading to something other than blessing. More like confused are those who read these words and who try to take them to heart. Or terrified, spooked are those who read these words and take them to heart. And so if that has been your experience, I hope that you will give it a fresh try, and I hope you'll come along on this journey. So where do we begin our study? Well, how about you take another drive with me this morning? I know just the right place to begin our study. Town of Mound. I've lived here my entire life. It's a city surrounded by lakes and water of bays and bridges. In the center of our community is what we call the island, Phelps Island, but the locals just call it the island, the home of many of our beloved Main Streeters. But when I was little, I liked to joke around that my mom didn't let me be friends with kids on the island. Mainly because my mom was afraid that if she ever tried to drive me to a friend's house or tried to pick me up, she would get so lost out on these twisty, curvy roads that she would never get off the island again. For many, when we open up the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, we have a similar experience. We're afraid if we begin to make our way into this strange book that we will find so many twists and turns, such a confusing mess of images and visions that we will get lost entirely and maybe never get out again. I want to take us on a journey in the coming weeks to begin to make sense of this powerful and hope-filled book, and to kind of rescue it from some of the strange ways and unhelpful ways it's been interpreted in the past. I don't claim to have the right interpretation, and we're only going to do a broad overview. But I think it's going to be well worth making the drive, well worth crossing over the bridge, taking some twists and turns, and finding the beauty that lies here in the book of Revelation. And it begins where else but on an island. So while Patmos Island might be where you go to have a killer divine vision, all the locals know if you want a killer hill to ride your bike down, you go to Phelps Island. You know, the book of Revelation has often been pulled out in times of distress, when the world is going through some cataclysmic moment, just like this moment. And it makes sense because all the conspiratorial quacks come out of their underground caves with their conspiracy theories and start speculating with their charts and whatnot. No one wants to hear gloom and doom and end times thoughts when life is good, when you're living high on the hog. But in moments when the ship starts to go down and life is a little uncertain, then we suddenly are interested in the lifeboat. We're suddenly interested in eternal things bigger than our present moment. And this is one of those moments where people are reaching for the book of Revelation. And so it's a great moment for us also to open it up and see what treasures God has inside. I like how Kurt Willems puts it. He says the last book of the Bible is a revelation of Jesus Christ to John for the church against the empire in the first century. And we're going to unpack that a bit as we go. But it's important to know that the very first couple words of this book tell us a whole great deal about what the aim and hope and purpose of this book is. And that is this. Verse 1:1 says, the revelation of Jesus Christ. The revelation of Jesus Christ. If this book does anything else, it's supposed to reveal to us Jesus, who he is, his character. And one of the problems of interpretive history is that we seem to, in some readings of Revelation, we have a Jesus who looks entirely different than the Jesus we encountered in the Gospels. In the Gospels, Jesus is a Jesus who says, my kingdom is one of self-sacrificial love, of turning the other cheek, of loving our enemies, not killing them. We turn to Revelation, and some people find a Jesus who's riding on a war horse, ready to kill and make people bleed. So the first thing that we're going to need to understand is that this book, read appropriately, will reveal the same Jesus that we know from the four Gospels. It's a beautiful revelation of Jesus, the conquering king, the lamb lion king, the king who conquered by laying down his life. And that's why we're calling this series Apocalypse Now. Because even this word apocalypse or apocalyptic, it has come to mean in popular jargon this terrifying, horrific, devastating event, this end of the world gloom and doom. That's what apocalypse seems to mean these days when most people hear it. But in Jesus' day, or in the original Greek, the word is simply apokalypsis. And it's a Greek word that means an unveiling, an uncovering, a revealing. And that's what this book does. It's going to reveal Jesus, the way that he's bringing his kingdom to earth, the surprising way he's conquering his foes, and the way he's bringing hope into people who are struggling. So it's a revelation of Jesus, an unveiling of Jesus, his character and purposes in and through the church. But it's also given to John. I, John, your brother and companion in the suffering and kingdom and patient endurance that are ours in Jesus. I was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. We don't know which John this is. Most scholars suspect it's not the same John, son of Zebedee, who wrote the fourth gospel. Whoever it is, he's a John who's steeped in the ancient Old Testament scriptures, because this book is just saturated with reference after reference to Old Testament echoes. And so he's deeply rooted in the ancient Hebrew scriptures. And he is on the island of Patmos for his testimony, for his ministry. He seems to be banished, exiled onto this island as a punishment for being an agitator, for stirring up trouble with his message of Jesus. really relate to John in this moment. Maybe we all can. I mean, John is, in effect, banished. He's isolated from his people, his church. He is living in quarantined on this remote island, away from the people he loves, he wants to minister to. No doubt this was a trying time of uncertainty in his own life, and it was an empire-wide, or at least in some pockets, a time of difficulty for the early Christian church, being persecuted. And it is in moments of uncertainty where we need a vision of hope, a hopeful vision of God's presence in the middle of our suffering. A reminder that Jesus is indeed on the throne, even when it looks like the enemies are having their way. And as Brent pointed out in his Daily Spark last week, sometimes it's when we are alone on a retreat by choice, or just banished into a wilderness in our own journey, when God can finally grab a hold of our heart, get our attention, and reveal to us a new and fresh vision of His love, of His purpose, of His faithfulness. There's a bridge on the island that connects the main Phelps Island to what is known locally as Enchanted Island. This bridge is called Red Bridge, even though it's green nowadays. This was known by the locals. This was the bridge of choice for jumping off of for teenagers. And whatever John experienced on Patmos, it certainly could fall in the enchanted category. And it is interesting that our isolation and hard times can be a strange kind of bridge that leads us into the enchanting presence of Jesus. And I love that when we finally get the first glimpse of Jesus, John says that he saw Jesus standing in the midst of the 7 lampstands. These lampstands represent the churches, encouraging thought to know that Jesus is with and among and right in the midst of his churches, no matter what we're going through. On the Lord's day, he continues, on the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, which said, write on a scroll what you see and share it with the 7 churches. And there we have that third part. This is a revelation of Jesus to John for the churches. And this was originally written to 7 actual communities of Christians in the first century who were going through their own trial, to give them hope, to prepare them, to urge them to faithfulness in the midst of potential struggle and suffering, to also challenge others who are becoming apathetic in their faith, to resist the lure of the empire, the spirit of the age. And whenever we end up turning this into an end times map for something that's going to happen at the end of history, we are bypassing the very purpose, the very fact that this was written to actual people, and it needed to have some purpose for them. And there's some clues right in the beginning as we read in the first couple verses. It's a revelation of Jesus, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. Verse 1:1. Must soon take place. That's the problem. If we think that this was some coded, encrypted map to unlock that's predicting how the last 7 years of history are going to go down 2,000 some years from now, it's meaningless for its original audience, which I think is just one sign that that's not the right approach to understanding this book. Now, it's going to have significance and meaning for the church of all times and all places, but its original meaning is found in its message to the original hearers facing real situations in the first century. The last book of the Bible is a revelation of Jesus, who he is, to John on the island of Patmos for the church then and now against the empire in the first century. And as we unpack this study, we're going to realize that this is not just a call to persevere in hard times. It's also a call to resist the Babylon presence, the beast, and all of its shapes and forms at all different times in history. And it's a message written to the first century, but Babylon takes new shapes and forms throughout history and every time and place. And so we need to always be on guard on whether we're being lured into a life away from Jesus, away from our first love. So next time, I want to begin to look at the message to the 7 churches. The message is some of the unique challenges that they faced, some of the message of hope and encouragement Jesus gave to these congregations, and also the message of warning that he gave to others. And I know we will find ourselves in those warnings and in those words of hope. And they will be words for us in this particular moment, when we are isolated in our own personal Patmos islands. And we, through this fresh vision of God's love and faithfulness, his presence with us, his grand purpose for history, we will find ourselves encouraged, and we will find ourselves inspired to remain faithful followers of the Lamb in this moment, at this time in history. See, another problem with avoiding Phelps Island is that you miss out on this delicious restaurant at the heart of it. If you navigate the twisty, curvy roads, you find yourself at Al and Elma's, one of Mound's treasures. And in a similar way, I hope that you will go on this journey with us into the book of Revelation, knowing that there is a feast that awaits those who are willing to navigate the ups and downs, the twists and turns, the confusing visions, symbols, and imagery. So come and feast. In fact, let me leave you with this word. John, he says that he was on Patmos, which is not a fun place to be. It's a place of loneliness, of isolation, of quarantine. But his true location, even there, was in the Spirit. It says, I was on Patmos on the Lord's Day in the Spirit. And that's the good news, is that wherever you might be physically located this moment, you can be in the Spirit, in Jesus, surrounded by his presence. So my prayer for you, church, is that you would not just be in isolation, in quarantine, but you'd be in Christ, in the Spirit, every day, all day, as we continue to walk out our faith together. So please join me again next week. And our midweek gatherings on Wednesday nights at 8 on Zoom are going to be digging into more of the text and continuing the conversation and having some interaction around this sermon series. So we hope you will join us and bring your questions and bring your curiosity. And let's not be afraid of the twists and the turns, but let's embrace the journey. Grace and peace to you, Main Street.